What's up everyone, welcome to today's video, welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today we're playing Miles Morales and we're looking at this small fight that's here, and I decided to take it from a whole different direction. I'm playing on a GTX 1080 rig with an i7 7700K. This rig belongs to one of my kids and it is their, working and gaming rig, and it was my video production device for a while, and then I just basically passed it on to him. Now, on playing on this particular setup on 1080, I was able to get 60 frames per second. In fact, when I increased the quality, I got about 70 frames per second. I think the 1080 Ti, it's an EVGA model, so it just kicked a little bit into gear and gave a little bit more, extra frames in the whole mix, which is kind of nice to have. But I did see that the word on the street is the game is having some performance issues for some people. Digital Foundry has done some performance metrics for it, but I've not necessarily taken the time to look at it because on my main rig, I'm not having any issues at all. In fact, I think the game is much better optimized than the Marvel Spider-Man Remastered. The Marvel Spider-Man Remastered, the gear that I used to actually run that game and run Miles Morales is the same, but the performance I'm getting is leaps and bounds different. And it shows that there are some things to be considered here. Number one, Nixxes is pretty much getting better at their craft, or at least the team at Insomniac, when they made Miles Morales, they made a better version of all of the core aspects of the Spider-Man game in 2018. Another thing too is, for those who may be in PC gaming who may not necessarily be satisfied across the board with the performance of games, you have to understand, if you're new, that getting your game to perform more consistently is actually the most important thing. Now, at some point, it probably won't make any difference. Say if your game is running at 170 FPS and it drops to 150, you probably wouldn't even notice at that point. But if you're using your rig and your rig is like an everyday rig, then locking it at a frame rate is actually something that you probably need to prioritize, because this is the biggest concept in game development overall. So let's talk about the console side, because Miles Morales is a game that was first on console before it went on PC. The PlayStation 5 version of that game runs very well. Its frame rate is actually wonderful, very pristine game, and so on and so forth. But if you played that game on a PlayStation 4, the game is locked at 30 FPS. Now, this doesn't mean that the hardware on the PlayStation 4 is not capable of running the game at even 40 FPS. I think it is, because most people may or may not know the PlayStation 4 hardware and the PlayStation 5 hardware in terms of their core specs are not too different. However, because the technology is newer, that's where the PlayStation 5 gets the biggest advantage. So when you think about it, you could at least push a little bit more in terms of performance with Miles Morales, because it's actually a smaller game compared to the 2018 Spider-Man. I mean, games were already running at 60 FPS a long time ago, and the PlayStation 4 is no stranger to 60 FPS games, especially games that are fighting games, and in some cases even some sporting games. You can get that kind of performance from it. But the developers understand that over the time and over the course of the game, the machine is probably going to have some limitations in terms of heat dissipation, throttling, and so on and so forth. And so locking it at a 30 FPS mark is going to give you consistent performance all through for the PlayStation 4. So on PC, when you take this development paradigm into perspective, you realize that if your game is not giving you this full-blown 60 FPS, you might need to modify your settings. This is what being a PC gamer is about. If you don't have a 1080 Ti or 6800 XT or one of these other big, huge graphics cards and CPUs, then all you have to do is just find the sweet spot, which is what the PC gamer is about, and you're able to get yourself a very good experience that is to your satisfaction. And if it's not to your satisfaction, you're probably going to be in the market looking for a new hardware to upgrade and get yourself a little bit more performance. And so it brings us also to another side of the conversation. There are new games out there. Those new games don't seem to be performing as well as the Sony first-party games. There's a big difference. Every video game is different, every development team is different, and Sony first-party games have the luxury of focusing on one system at the moment, or at least one set of systems. Their engines, their software, their pipelines and processes are going to be able to get the job done at once. The other games that you're seeing that are running at 60 FPS on the newer consoles, most of them don't have the scope, the depth, and the ambition of the newer titles. So you have to basically understand that there's a lot of different pain points that you can actually filter out that makes the conversation a lot more complicated than it actually sounds on the surface, because right now the whole brush of its bad optimization continues to get swung all over the internet. Oh, the game is just poorly optimized. Oh, the game is just poorly optimized. Yet nobody can actually tell you what optimization is when you actually press them and ask them. You're like, so what is optimization? So how do you optimize? And people say, well, I don't care. Other games have done it. Well, other games are not this game. This game is not other games. This is something that everyone has to go ahead and realize as quickly as possible. So seeing that even a PlayStation 5 in its own right is able to run a lot of its video games at high resolution, high frame rates doesn't even mean it's doing it perfectly. Because I mentioned something to someone just in our comment section, and they were saying, you know, a lot of these other games seem to be doing well from Sony. And I said, well, when you look at many video games, you have to actually understand the composition of those video games in regard to their size, their scope, their visual effects and lighting paradigms. And these are going to be the things that clue you into how this game will probably be requiring hardware power for its performance. A game like Evil West is heavy on VFX. It was built in Unreal Engine 4, and as somebody who uses Unreal Engine 4 myself, I can tell you that visual effects are actually very tasking on that engine. On some other engines, you can get away with a lot in terms of visual effects because those engines will probably render those effects very differently in in its overall side of things. If you even want to see the tasking nature of new visual effects into paradigms, look at God of War Ragnarok. I know some of you probably think that game is probably without any faults or whatever. It does have some errors. I've seen some, glitches and bugs in the game, but nothing crazy. Some of them are collision bugs. Some of them are just basically, mesh bugs, but it didn't cause any breaking of the game, so it's not anything to worry about. But there is one specific scenario where the game actually loses a little bit of performance in the PS5. And they made sure that they measured how many of those encounters you have so that you basically will not notice it. And that is when you're fighting the electric Drakes. Now, if you've played God of War Ragnarok, you know what I'm talking about. Whenever these Drakes do one particular move and you're close to them, they actually spawn these electric shock visual effects. And if you're close, your frames are going to drop. It's just something that happens. Now, I don't know why this is the case, but here's what my hypothesis is. The electric, VFX seems to be something, and this is the yellow one, that's been newly introduced into the God of War system. Because if you look at the past games, we had ice and fire and some other really cool visual effects, but the electric one for that particular creature that's on the ground is new. I don't think I remember having seen it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for some reason with that character, it slows down the animation, and you might see some spikes in frame time if you're actually paying very close attention to it. But it's very minimal because you dodge anyways and you draw back, so you probably are not even worried about the frame rates there. You're worried about not getting melted by this enemy NPC. So this is what game development is about. When you see that your game is probably causing some issues here, you have to design your game around hopping over those issues and hopping over those bugs or performance limitations that you might have. And so this can also stifle ambition of video game development in some instances. So whenever people see things like the Series S getting 30 FPS for a game and they complain about it, I think they're basically throwing away this particular aspect of the conversation, that if you want to optimize that game to run at 60 FPS for the Series S, you would have to actually go back and do a lot more work in redesigning the game in specific points anyways, so that it can run at that 60 FPS. This is what the optimization people are probably thinking of. That's actually what it is. It's not some magical coding process or like a patch to fix a bug. No, 30 FPS is not a bug. People are looking down on it like it's some kind of a big issue, but it actually isn't. It's just basically you taking time to modify parameters for one platform that would allow for that platform to get the job done. In developing for multiple platforms, it's almost illogical to have a developer or expect a developer to do that for every single platform at launch. So what they do is they go with the most viable and most stable version of the game at whatever performance it can run for whatever machine, and then over time they start building upon it as the game goes on. This to me sounds like it's sensible, because if not, the game will never leave development, because even after the game releases, you're still going to have bugs and issues and whatever that they're going to be patching. So in my opinion, I think it's probably something where if you're probably not satisfied, you're probably better off maybe just waiting. So it brings it full circle to Miles Morales. The 2018 remastered port for PC was just not as good. But Miles Morales, after maybe a few, more, I would say, understanding of how the game was built and even better practices within Insomniac, Nixxes has been able to take this game to do much better. And it will still have its bugs. In fact, it does have its bugs. I already saw one bug like right in the first, 3% of the game, but it is not a big deal. It's just something that we laughed at here on the channel and we talked about it, but that was pretty much it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the gameplay. I hope you guys probably picked or gleaned something from the conversation. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section if you're playing on PC, what your experience has been like, what your rig and your gear is like. I usually don't share my own gear details because it's production gear, so that's not necessarily what everyone might be gaming on, but it is what it is. I usually would play the games and record and do all that stuff, and we just basically have these conversations. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for watching the video, and hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.